When Donald Trump sat down with Vladimir Putin, the world held its breath. Was it diplomacy or something far more dangerous? Behind closed doors, two of the most powerful men on Earth spoke for hours with no one else in the room. What really happened in that meeting? Why did Trump's words shake America, divide Washington, and leave allies around the world questioning the future of U.S. leadership? Today, we uncover the untold story of the Trump-Putin summit, its shocking impact on America, and how it changed the global balance of power forever. Stay tuned, because the truth might surprise you. When Donald Trump met Vladimir Putin, it was more than a handshake between two world leaders. It was a moment that captured the attention of the globe, sparking fierce debates in Washington, Moscow, and across international capitals. The meeting, held in Helsinki in July 2018, symbolized far more than just diplomatic courtesy. It represented a clash of worldviews, the collision of two nations with long and complicated histories, and the raising of questions about trust, power, and global influence in an era of shifting alliances. For Americans, it was not just about foreign policy, but also about the integrity of their democracy, the credibility of their intelligence community, and the future of U.S. leadership on the world stage. For the rest of the world, it was about whether the established balance of power was about to change. To understand the true significance of this meeting, one has to step back and consider the historical relationship between the United States and Russia. For most of the 20th century, the two countries were locked in the Cold War, a tense standoff defined by nuclear competition, ideological rivalry, and proxy wars across the globe. Even after the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, the relationship did not evolve into the harmonious partnership many had hoped for. Instead, suspicions persisted. Russia saw NATO's expansion toward its borders as a threat, while the United States grew increasingly critical of Russia's internal politics and foreign interventions. By the time Trump entered the White House in 2017, relations were already at their lowest point in decades. The annexation of Crimea by Russia in 2014, Moscow's support for separatists in eastern Ukraine, and Russia's decisive role in supporting the Assad regime in Syria had put Washington and Moscow on opposite sides of almost every major global issue. Against this backdrop, Trump's repeated statements that he wanted to get along with Russia raised eyebrows. To his supporters, this seemed like common sense. After all, Russia was a nuclear power, and reducing tensions could help prevent catastrophic conflict. To his critics, however, Trump's warm words for Putin sounded suspicious, especially as the U.S. intelligence community had concluded that Russia interfered in the 2016 U.S. presidential election to help Trump win. The stage was set for the Helsinki summit, and the world watched with anticipation, wondering whether it would lead to breakthroughs or breakdowns. The meeting itself was unusual from the start. Trump and Putin spent over 2 hours together in a private conversation with only interpreters present. No aides, advisors, or officials were allowed in the room. This decision fueled speculation about what might have been said, with some fearing that Trump had made concessions in secret that would never be revealed. The secrecy only intensified suspicion, particularly in Washington, where lawmakers and intelligence officials demanded to know what had transpired. When the two leaders emerged for their joint press conference, it was the American president's words that created a political firestorm. Asked whether he accepted U.S. intelligence findings that Russia interfered in the 2016 election, Trump appeared to side with Putin's denial over his own agencies. He stated that he did not see why Russia would interfere, a line that stunned allies and critics alike. In the United States, the reaction was immediate and explosive. Democrats accused Trump of betraying his own country, with some going as far as to suggest that his behavior bordered on treason. Prominent figures in the media described the moment as one of the lowest in American diplomatic history. Even many Republicans, usually loyal to Trump, expressed outrage. Senators like John McCain and Lindsey Graham issued sharp rebukes, saying the president had undermined U.S. credibility and weakened America's position against its adversaries. The uproar dominated headlines for weeks, reinforcing the perception that Trump was unusually soft on Putin. At the same time, Trump's core supporters saw the issue differently. To them, Trump was bravely trying to break through decades of hostility and seek peace rather than escalate tensions. This divide reflected the broader polarization of American politics, where every event seemed to reinforce existing divisions rather than create consensus. In Russia, the optics were far different. The Kremlin celebrated the meeting as a diplomatic victory. Russian state media portrayed Putin as a respected statesman who had forced Washington to treat Moscow as an equal. Trump's public doubt of his own intelligence community was highlighted as evidence that the Russian leader's denials were credible. For ordinary Russians, the summit was a rare moment of pride in their nation's standing after years of sanctions and international criticism. Putin, ever the strategist, understood the symbolic value of being seen side by side with the President of the United States. Even if no concrete policy shifts emerged, the meeting itself sent the message that Russia could not be ignored. While much of the public focus was on the press conference, the actual discussions between Trump and Putin touched on critical issues shaping global politics. Though the details remain partly secret, analysts agree that they likely discussed the war in Syria, where the US and Russia were backing opposing sides. They also addressed nuclear arms control, with treaties like START looming in the background. Economic sanctions were almost certainly raised, as Russia sought relief from US and European penalties. NATO also hung over the talks, with Trump having repeatedly criticized allies for not spending enough on defense, a stance that aligned with Putin's long-standing hostility toward the alliance. Behind closed doors, it is likely that China also entered the conversation, as both Washington and Moscow were beginning to reassess how Beijing's growing influence affected their own strategies. The long-term impact of the meeting was not limited to diplomacy. Domestically in the United States, it intensified debates about the Mueller investigation into Russian interference. Every word Trump spoke in Helsinki was scrutinized for signs of collusion, fueling months of controversy and hearings in Congress. The meeting also became a rallying point in the lead-up to the 2020 presidential election, with Democrats framing Trump as dangerously close to Putin, while Trump insisted he was simply practicing smart diplomacy. The political fallout deepened polarization, cementing the Trump-Putin dynamic as one of the most contentious foreign policy issues of his presidency. Globally, the meeting sent ripples across alliances and rivalries. In Europe, leaders were alarmed. Many feared that Trump was weakening NATO by cozying up to Russia, which could embolden Moscow to act more aggressively in Eastern Europe. Germany and France began speaking more openly about building greater European military independence, no longer certain they could fully rely on Washington. In the Middle East, the meeting influenced the course of the Syrian conflict, as US and Russian strategies had to account for each other's positions. Even in Asia, the summit had indirect effects, as China watched closely to see whether Russia and the United States were moving closer together or drifting further apart. Ultimately, the Helsinki meeting did not result in dramatic agreements or policy shifts, but its symbolic weight was enormous. It raised questions about whether the United States was retreating from its traditional role as leader of the Western Alliance and whether Russia was succeeding in reshaping the global order. For Trump, it was both a gamble and a statement. He wanted to be seen as a dealmaker who could rewrite the rules of international politics, but the backlash at home limited his freedom of action. For Putin, it was a public relations triumph, even if practical results were limited. Looking back, the Trump-Putin meeting reflects the complexities of modern geopolitics. It showed how diplomacy in the 21st century is not just about negotiations behind closed doors, but also about public perception, media narratives, and political theater. It highlighted the fragility of alliances, the persistence of Cold War-era mistrust, and the difficulty of balancing national interests with global responsibilities. Most importantly, it revealed how much the fate of nations can be shaped by the words and actions of just two individuals standing side by side before the cameras. In the end, the truth about the impact of the Trump-Putin meeting lies in both the tangible and the intangible. It did not produce new treaties or sweeping policy changes, but it altered perceptions, fueled controversies, and shifted the way America and the world viewed its president. It reminded us that diplomacy is as much about image as it is about substance, and that sometimes a single sentence can shake confidence, stir outrage, and echo across history. For the United States, it was a test of trust in leadership and institutions. For Russia, it was proof that it still mattered on the global stage. For the world, it was a moment of uncertainty, leaving behind more questions than answers about the future of international relations in an age defined by rivalry, suspicion, and the struggle for influence.